Hi, this is David Rathoff again. I'm just going to be going through more on building a game using Ruby and Gosu. Um, just to give you a kind of an idea of where we're heading, I'll just show you a quick example of the version of the game that's a little further along running. So we can move around this level and lose health, gain health. We cannot retrace our steps, so I can't go like left here. And then if I make it to the end, I can advance to the next level. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but there's also some music playing in the background. But anyway, that's where we're heading. We're actually not too far from that at the moment, but I just show you the current progress. So at this point, we have a board and a heart meter. Um, there's an idea of a player, but we don't actually have a sprite for it yet. So I can move around, and you'll notice the health disappear. But we don't actually have a sprite to represent the player at this point. So yeah, so that's kind of where we are. So I want to basically want to introduce the player sprite. I think it's probably the next place to go. But the thing, I've started a new branch here in the project called feature add player sprite, where I'm going to be doing this. The first thing I did was we have a class called board sprite that was used for kind of the board elements, but I wanted to make it a little more generic so that we could reuse it for any kind of sprite. So you'll notice I have a previous commit here that's pretty boring. It's just renaming any place where we had the class board sprite with sprite and the instance board sprite with sprite. So nothing too exciting here. But yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the changes I'm going to be making for today. And as part of this process, I'll be running guard in the background to run our specs as we're making changes. And that'll just automatically run any specs for files that we touch so that we can see whether or not everything's still green or not. So yeah, that's where we're starting from. So the other issue that I noticed, I'd actually recorded a video on this earlier and then kind of decided I want to go a slightly different direction. But if we look at any of the places that are using the sprite class, you'll notice the way it's using it is really it's inheriting from the sprite class. It's not really doing much other than setting up some values. So it's not really there's not really a lot of, when I think of using inheritance, it's kind of for specialization of something. And this isn't really doing anything specialized. It's got some slightly different parameters. But beyond that, there's not a lot going on. Kind of same thing on all the places it's used. It's just kind of some defaults basically that are getting passed in. So before actually adding anything new, I think what I want to try to do is instead of having these things inherit from sprite, I think I just want them to have an instance of a sprite, and then just hold on to that reference. So yeah, because it's going to start looking weird if, well, for one thing, it would look a little weird to me to have all of these things inheriting from sprite, and as we add more behavior to each of these objects, it doesn't really make sense for it to inherit from something as specific as sprite. Like, so for example, player, not only is it going to have a sprite, it might have, there might be other types of things, that behaviors that it has, like there could be artificial intelligence, or there could be inventory, and like with inheritance, you can only inherit from one thing. We could do something like a module where we just include either a bunch of methods, whether they're instance or class methods, but I don't know. To me, it seems like kind of the right balance might be just having things hold on to a sprite and then know how to interact with that. So I think that's the route I'm going to try to go. Hoping I can do that in like 15 or 20 minutes. If it starts to take much longer than that, I may either split this into multiple videos or do something slightly different. But let's just go ahead and see if we can get that going. So the easiest way to do it's probably just going to be to take something that we're rendering, and instead of having it inherit from sprite, we could just go ahead and give it that instance of sprite. I'm going to pull up the sprite class too. So just to kind of recap, sprite's being initialized with a whole bunch of values. I think one of the reasons too that was I had subclassed it before was so we didn't have to pass all these values into sprite. So there may want to find some other way to handle that. In fact, it might make sense for, if these are really just kind of like default setups for types of sprites, it might make sense to have these things be called something like this, like board item sprite, but then have an actual board item that has that. So that's one possibility. So just taking a look around here. Yeah, so there's quite a bit of initialization info here. We're just holding on to defaults based on, or sorry, we're passing in a few values, and then we're just setting some hard-coded defaults, which I'm not too crazy about. And then I guess one thing we could do is yeah, there's a few things going on that I'm noticing. So one of them is that we're passing around X, Y, and Z when really we have a concept of a position already. So this is kind of a smell. This is a code smell known as like a data clump. If you're passing around the same variables all over the place, it's kind of a sign that you're missing a concept in your system. So yeah, maybe there's going to be a lot of things that kind of tie into figuring out whether or not to turn this thing into something that we just make instances of in these different cases. But as part of starting to clean it up, maybe we can just go ahead and start with using a position here instead of passing around X, Y, and Z all over the place. So yeah, that's a nice, easy win that'll kind of simplify things a little bit. So maybe we can start from that angle. So let's pull up the sprite spec. All right. So we're checking on things like that it does have an X, Y, and Z value, and has a draw method and a value equals method. So we could technically, so up here we have attribute readers for X, Y, and Z. We could pull these out. We could have these, well, for the time being we can leave them up there, but basically we could make, if we really do need access to X, Y, and Z, we could make our own implementations of those that looked something like position.x and then position.y, position.z. But before we do that, I just want to see if we're actually using that information anywhere. So do we have things that are like dot x being referenced for a sprite. It doesn't really look like we do. So if I took these out without adding my methods down here, if I just took these readers off, I wonder if anything in our program is going to fail besides the specs. So you'll notice now our specs are checking for X, Y, and Z, but that isn't available, so they're going to be failing. So let's see if we actually run our program, if anything fails because it was relying on those. Okay, so here we go. So in Sprite 33, saying undefined local or method X for board map. Okay. I see. So here, we're trying to look up a tile, which is in our tile set based on X, Y, and Z. And it's basically saying we don't have, within here, we don't have attribute readers available. So if we do this, this will fix this problem. I'm not this isn't a long-term solution, but just want to see if that's enough to get this to go. Okay, and it looks like it is. So basically it's just an internal implementation thing in the class that's preventing it from us being able to make that change. So just as an interim step, I'm going to switch it to this kind of representation. But what we can do now is we can say, we know that there's nothing outside of here looking for X, Y, or Z directly. It's just an internal concern. So instead of doing this, we could do position equals position.new. And the defaults for new are 0, 0, 0. And what we're going to have to do is we'll assume 0, 0, 0. But now if somebody wanted to pass in their own custom position, they would just do that when they instantiate, sprite or subclass it. So I'm just going to hold on to position now. And we should be able to change this up. And so position is something we probably want to make available. So I'm okay with adding it here. You know what? I'll hold off and do that because we'll make a test for that. But for the time being, we'll make these just position.y and position.z. Okay, so now it's being instantiated with more arguments than we need. So we went from three arguments down to 1. So we just need to see where we're doing sprite.new. Okay, so we have some specs to update, but let's see where this is actually complaining. So in board map initialization, there's a problem. Okay, so when we initialize board map, we're receiving an X and Y, but really we just want to pass these along. And so we'll just pass along a position now instead of X and Y. And similarly with Z, we can just pass that in. So in this case, it's 0, which is a default, so we don't really even need to include it. So you can kind of see how this is, when you have an object that knows like what its defaults are supposed to be, that contains these things, it kind of prevents you from having to sprinkle default setup around all over the place. So let's see where that gets us. Okay, so now it's complaining wrong number of arguments, 2 for 1. Also, to something to note, we'll probably see these failures if we run our specs. Probably see basically the same things happening. So we could either, clean up our specs or clean up the program directly. It's probably better to just start knocking out the specs because doing that will fix these other issues kind of along the way, I guess. So yeah, maybe we can just go ahead and start with board position. Okay, so here's a case where it's trying to make a new board item and a new map. It's passing in X and Y. And let's just go ahead and open up those items, I think. By fixing these, we'll fix a lot of these. So position dot new x, y, and for z we're going to pass in 1 because that's our z here. And let's do the same thing on that other class. So we were in board map, or sorry, we were in board, I think. Board position. Yeah. So we have a board map class, which I think we already patched up. Okay. So yeah, let's run the specs again. Okay. So now I think we probably need to also update the specs in a similar way. So let's just go to the board map spec. Now you'll notice we have we're looking for the X, Y, and Z of board map, but I don't believe we're actually doing that anywhere outside of the specs. So I'm just going to get rid of those. We'll want to replace those with specs for the position, but for the time being, I'm just going to comment these out. And here, we'll also want to do position.new of 5 and 10. And we're testing the z is 0, and the default for z is 0, so we don't actually need to set that, but it might be nice just for clarity in the setup here. So I'm just going to actually go ahead and remove these. And let's see if that reduced our number of failing specs. So we're down to, we were at, looks like we have 6 examples and 6 failures for board map spec. Okay, so so all of these are currently failing. And let's just follow that through. So here, oh, I see, because now I'm instantiating board map with positions instead of X and Y like it's expecting. Yeah, so we're not tackling too much at once. I'm actually just going to back out this change the way I'm initializing it. And let's just get this working. So now it's saying, okay, wrong number of arguments, 2 for 0. And that is in is not liking it's not liking board map.new, which is expecting X and Y. which then is calling position. Oh, I see. So position takes named arguments, which I probably want to switch to pretty much everywhere. But so we have to name these, and the way we name them is using a symbol. So x is going to be the symbol x is going to take the value x, symbol y is going to take the value y, and then z we won't provide, and I'll just pick it up as a default. Okay, so now we're getting a slightly different error. So in Sprite, it's saying undefined variable or method x for board map. Let's figure out what that's about. So this super is calling Sprite. Sprite's initializer here. Okay, so now we're taking, oh yeah, we're initializing with the position. And we can drop x, y, and z. Okay. Now we have a different set of failures. Wrong number of arguments, 2 for 0 to 1 on line 7. So somehow it's receiving, okay, so it must be the Sprite spec is initializing it with an x and a y value, and what we want to initialize with is x, y, and z. And we have to name these, each of these arguments that we're passing. And we're no longer going to have the direct.x.y.z. If those are being used, I wouldn't get rid of this, but I don't think they're being used anywhere, so I'm just going to remove those for the time being. Okay. And I forgot to call .new to get an instance. That's the problem there. Okay, so now those specs are passing. So now let's kind of back out a little bit. So we'll go back to board map, and again, I'm just going to remove these. And we're going to get, okay, that's not working. And we may as well go ahead and, if we're going to be passing these things around, let's just go ahead and convert this one also to be a position. And was that our default? Yeah, 0 was our default. And we'll have to change that over here. So we'll want to say position equals position dot new. If nothing is, if one isn't provided. And then here we'll want to say position is equal to position. And instead of doing this, we'll just pass in the position. You can kind of see too that they're starting to see some like redundancy here. Like we probably, well, yeah, we'll just run with this for a second. Just get it passing before we get into that. Okay, so now we have a bunch of specs failing because they're probably trying to call board map with the old way. So let's just make sure everything's switched up. So just pick one of these. So in saying wrong number of arguments, 3 for 0. So when we call position.new with 3, oh, I see. I'm calling it with 3 unnamed arguments, so I have to name these. And there we go. Yeah, I have a mix of methods with named and unnamed variables. So I'll be switching over to the stronger version of that, which is to name them as we go through this. So yeah, we have board map. Let's check out board item now. Notice there's a similar pattern here. So let's just go ahead and change this one up to So we want to make this equal to, we want to have a position with a default value of just position.new. We want to hold on to that, whatever was passed in or the default. And instead of having to, so this is kind of interesting. So here we have a difference. So here we want to set a default and pass that along to super. So let's do this, position.z equals 1, and then we'll just pass along position. I think we have assignments. I imagine we have assignments on position. Okay, this is interesting. We don't. So there's a couple ways we could do this, but I think I just want to go ahead and set these to be an accessors so they can be set in addition to being read. Okay, so now that's working for us. Yeah, we could. There's some other ways we could have done that. We could have added one of a position with a z of 1 to it, but I don't actually know what's going to be passed in, and I think we just want to lock the z index at 1 on this stuff because we're trying to basically lock in the layer that it's going to render in. So we don't really want to allow for variation unless we have a good reason to. Okay, so that one's taken care of. Let's run the whole suite because I know there's still some things failing. Okay, so heart spec we haven't updated. It's probably going to be the exact same thing. So again, we'll just, hopefully this is kind of feeling fairly mechanical at this point. These kind of refactors should be kind of boring. It's just going to be a new position, and that defaults to a z index of 0. This does bring up an interesting point. While z is or 0 is the default for z, we probably want to ensure that on these. So let's just go ahead and assign z to 0. I should probably do that on that other one that, yeah. So here I should do position.z 0. Oh, and here I need to actually hold on to the position. All right. So back to heart. So we're still passing in the wrong number of arguments, so that's probably in the spec. And what is our z? Our z is 0. Again, I'm going to get rid of these because we're going to replace these with position specs. And once again, I forgot to name the arguments. Okay, so now it's we're attempting to call super with coordinates instead of a position. So I'm just going to pass position right along. Okay, and then let's see what's still failing. So board item, let's start with that one. It's got the most failures. Probably a similar thing. This might be in the spec for it. And it is. So here we just need to do position.new. We need to do x, y, and what is our z? It is 1. Okay. And cool, we locked our z into 1 over here. Okay, so now there's, oh yeah, sorry, parsing error. Forgot to close a parenthesis. And that's kind of the nice thing with guard running in the background. I could catch right away that there was some kind of syntax error. Okay, so now it's saying z equals. This is not. Um, oh yeah, I have a typo here. Something I like about lining things up, I was able to look at that and something looked off to me because these weren't lined up, even though they're the same word. It's a good, easy way to catch typo. So now, what do we have left? Just down to map or board position spec. So let's look at board position. So it's saying it's trying to pass in 2 arguments for 1, and that's going to be on these. So here we want to do position.new x and y. Okay. Oh, I messed this one up. I need a position. Uninitialized const. Oh, I see. Um, that's kind of interesting. Typo, once again. Okay, so this is actually kind of indicating something too, which is that um, um, we have. So this is what I was talking about with data clumps. Once we change this to an actual object, you can easily see it's redundant because we had to do the same thing in 2 places. And you'll notice up here we're passing in x and y's, so we could actually do the same thing here. And just get rid of these. And now I'm going to actually just change this to a reader of position. And with that, we can just change these to be position. There we go. We'll have to change the specs or the places where board position is used so that it is called the new way, but that's pretty easy to do. Start with the spec. Again, this is all kind of feels a little redundant, which is good. And we may want to test the actual position. So maybe we can do this. We could make an x and y method that read from board position. It's probably a better thing to do, but just for the sake of showing that this will work, let's just do it like this for a second. So there we go. And that might be a quick little improvement to make on board position. So to prevent having to, I can't remember if we can do a delegate directly in Ruby or not, but let's just do it this way for now. So basically we're delegating methods off to something else. It'd be nice to do that as a clear delegation to this object that we have an instance of. But for now, I don't really care. Technically, we don't even need to access position directly, but we do it below, so maybe I'll make it a private method. And then these are still available if we want to access them this way, so we could go back over to our spec and switch this back to what it was. And then nobody knows the difference. So there we go, our specs are failing. Let's run them all. Okay, now we got some more problems. These are probably places that we're calling board position. Yep. So looks like quite a few places, but it's all the same error. So in board, we make these new board positions. So this is kind of interesting. We're creating all these different board positions. So let's just go ahead and, for a second, we'll do it this way. So now we're just passing it a full-fledged position, or reified position instead of a data clump. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. So I've got a typo. I think it's probably confused because I have so many things going on here. So there's where position.new ends, there's where board.new or board position.new ends, the argument list ends, I should say. Okay, so we're good again. Now this looks a little weird to me. I think what I want to do is pull this out into a local thing. And then do this. Should be the exact same thing. And there we go. So that's a little bit nicer instead of hitting instead of passing around X and Y or X and Y and Z everywhere, we're just kind of cleaning it all up into one thing. You'll notice there's more places we're doing this. So there'll probably be more of this kind of thing to do. But getting back to what we were originally trying to do, which is to clean up Sprite, be able to use it a little more directly as an instance on things. We've kind of cleaned these bits up somewhat. So one thing that's still a little goofy to me is we have this going on. We're calling tile.new, and we're having to split X, Y, and Z out again. I think what we want to do is fix that up. So we might do how do I want to handle this? So we're kind of doing a shortcut here. So I'm just going to do return sprite if sprite. So if it's already set it up, then we don't have to worry about doing it a second time. But our setup's getting a little more complicated here. So I want to say position equals, and then we know the position of the thing we're in, but we want to add this offset to it. And to do that, we can do position.new 0. That's a Y offset, so I'll add it in here. And we don't need to even set 0. In fact, we could just set Y, and it'll pick up the defaults for the other things because we have named arguments. So this is one of the things that's nice about named arguments. But in order for that to work, now we're going to have to pass in position, and then we'll get rid of these things. And tile's going to have to know about this too. So we'll probably have to pull that class up. Yeah, and so here you kind of see in the pattern, like there's X, Y, and Z just everywhere. So let's change this to be position. And we'll default to, I don't know if I want to have a default. Well, I guess I had a default of all zeros, so we can do position.new. And here, instead of doing all this, we'll do positions equal position. Don't need these things. Here, and instead of having a reader for those, we'll have a reader for position. And that's a private reader. We're not actually using it, so I'm going to get rid of it. We are using sprite. And then here, so I think this is kind of interesting. So we're getting a sprite and we're calling draw on it. What does sprite's draw look like? What is sprite in this case? So sprite is the thing that we're pulling out. It's the tile. This seems like this is kind of a weird circular reference going on. Oh, I see. The thing we're passing in is sprite is really a tile. So let's change that. And that is one thing out of this set of the tile set. And I think the tile set actually really needs an X, Y, and Z for drawing. Yeah, it's part of kind of the Gosu image setup. So yeah, I think we'll leave that, but we do need to change. We change this to tile, so we need to change that over here as well. It's really an image or a section of an image. I'll just change it to tile for now. It's still not crazy about the naming, but we'll have to figure out something better and don't want to do too much at one time. So probably have failing specs as well because it's kind of surprising actually. Well, I guess maybe this was all internal to here, the renaming of the argument. So yeah, let's try to run our app. It's very possible there's things that are still not working, but let's see. Okay, so tile.rb line 8. Right, I forgot to change this. So this needs to be, so I'm gonna go ahead and make a private down here so we can refer to position. This is gonna be position.x, y, and z. The thing you'll notice too is I'm not using parentheses anywhere, and this kind of goes against the normal, the most standard of the Ruby conventions. I kind of like, I think it's called BBAT style, or BBAT's off or something. Somebody's name I can never remember. There's kind of another competing style, which is like the Seattle Ruby style, and they tend to leave off parentheses when they're not necessary. And I prefer less syntax when I don't need it. So that's typically the way that I fall on those things with code. Okay, and then in heart, wrong number of arguments, 2 for 1. Let's check that out. So something is trying to pass an X and Y to heart, I think is what's going on. That's heart meter. Yep, so here we're setting up an X and Y. So I want to actually do this for real. And we have to explicitly set these names for our arguments. Now we can do new with position. And there we go. So I think that's going to wrap this one up. It's kind of a small refactor, but we do 2 or 3 of these, and we've basically done the hard work to make it easy, or so that it is easy when we come back through and want to use Sprite for more things. So yeah, I'm going to stop this one here. I will. You'll be able to see these changes either in this branch if you're following along, or they'll get merged into master when I've finished making Sprite something that's more usable. But yeah, thanks for following along. And if you missed the earlier videos, this is a series where we start from nothing and build up to this. And we'll be hopefully getting into some more interesting stuff, but these kind of little cleanup steps really help kind of set the groundwork for making things move more quickly later on. So just trying to get some of these knocked out before we end up with too much duplication like this laying around. So anyway, thanks for following along, and look for more of these coming soon. Thanks.